There's homophobic slurs being thrown around in the hallway. I must say, when I first came here, I felt like there was a lot of moments that I would be in the hallway, oh, that's so gay. And that's one comment that grinds my gears. And so I personally would challenge our students and say, hey, you know what's gay? I am. And then they always look at me like I just, said the worst thing in the world.
So I was a lesbian, and so brutal was the violence against LGBT people, so resolute was homophobia in Jamaica, that I don't think it dawned on me that I was gay until I was about maybe 17 or 18. And then I didn't quite say it out loud until I was about 20.
Even though it might have a grain of truth, it does frustrate me when people equate religion to homophobia. I'm a very deeply religious person, and the idea that people just write it off and they're like, oh, it's all homophobia anyway, like read the text, get to know the text, understand the time people were living in, understand the context in which they were speaking, and then maybe you can judge a little better instead of just writing it all off as just oh, it's all just homophobic.
My mother says something to me which is actually at the core of all of my plays, which is, as she mentioned in the most earnest and loving of ways, there are millions of people in this world who don't even know you and want you dead. And I just took that wow. And so those words from my mom has always carried me, and it reminded me that I have to survive, that I have to exist.
It's interesting because in some ways it's easy to draw a narrative that says, okay, because I was in the Muslim community, I had to silence this queer side of me. But when you have public pressure, especially community that's under a lot of threat and is feeling watched all the time, there is more and more pressure internally to sort of conform or to pick your battles. It's sort of well, we can't fight this right now because we have all this other stuff to worry about. We have surveillance to worry about. We have war to worry about.
I think we are sort of inherently afraid of things that don't look like us. And that's where homophobia stems from.
I always use those opportunities to teach them.
Ally for me is that person who understands the privilege that they may have in spaces to actually step in.
Be the person who say, excuse me, that's actually not okay, right? And interrupt that moment and voice why that's wrong and what's the damage that is being done.
Find your community. And I know that's such a privileged thing to say because a lot of trans kids aren't able to come out and that's so hard, but there are people out in the world who want to accept you.
I had this one teacher who, I think it was this week or last week, for the first time ever, he included a transgender athlete in the lesson. The lesson was focused on that transgender athlete.
But if you say nothing, you're producing that same oppressive moment. But yes, the alternative is not to call the cops because cops are gonna put us behind jails. The alternative is how do we really have these conversations, real conversations with our community members as to why we need to be in this together.
It's for someone to step in and say, wait, how can I support this person? How can I remove? It's not being silent when these things are happening.
If you can find your community, hold on to those communities and become a community for somebody else.
1, it'll spark conversation. 2, it'll normalize the fact that there are gay people in this classroom. There are lesbian people in this classroom.
We tend to internalize other people's behaviors, and a lot of the work around homophobia revolves around parsing out what's their crap and what can you work on, essentially.